Welcome back, everybody. Here we are, the review of issue 87. Let's go ahead and get started. Imperial Interdictor Cruiser. So right off the bat, you can see that it looks very similar to a Star Destroyer, but it is not a Star Destroyer. So there we go. For a long time, scientists toyed with the idea of using tractor beams to intercept starships passing through defined hyperspace corridors. However, targeting a vehicle traveling in excess of light speed in a parallel dimension when the exact location of that ship was unknown proved nigh on impossible. Even had a ship been hit by a beam, the stresses imposed on the fast-moving ship would have almost certainly destroyed it immediately, along with whatever was generating the tractor beam. The more obvious solution, though a complex one to engineer, was to take advantage of the very systems that made hyperspace travel possible, along with the nature of hyperspace itself, and this is exactly what designers of the distinctive immobilizer 418 Cruiser, later to evolve in an interdictor class, set out to do. A new style. Let's go ahead and go through this one real quick. The design of the interdictor class featured a hull similar to that of a Star Destroyer, with much of the basic superstructure being the same for both ships. The most significant difference between the two craft was also the most obvious, the inclusion of the interdictor four globe-like gravity well projectors that protruded from the surface of the upper and lower hulls. The command tower was also different, being larger, wider, and flatter than that of the standard Imperial Star Destroyer. Though this new interdictor was armed with turbo lasers and quad cannons, it carried far fewer than a Star Destroyer, as the vast majority of power the vessel's reactors generated went toward creating projecting their gravity wells. This would be perpetual weakness in the interdictor line, as it meant the ships required escorts at all times. Out from the shadows, the phenomena the designers targeted were gravity shadows, or gravity wells. Any large object, such as a planet or moon, casts a gravity shadow into space around it, which any passing starships must avoid lest it be pulled in. Along established hyperspace corridors, avoid the gravity shadows of familiar planets or moons, which is why they allow for travel at speeds that would otherwise be unthinkably dangerous. However, while hyperspace is an alternative dimension to our own, it can still be influenced by it, and the gravity shadows cast by unexpected objects such as asteroids or space stations can seep into the lanes from their equivalent locations in real space. Any collision with such an object would be fatal, so hyperspace-equipped starships are fitted with scanners that prompt the navicomputer to automatically drop out of hyperspace the moment any shadow is detected. The abrupt transition back into real space is rarely smooth, but a few repairs are considered small sacrifice when compared to instant destruction. Theory versus practice. The theory, then, was to find a way to generate a gravity shadow of sufficient size to cause a target ship's safety systems to drop out of hyperspace and into the hands of waiting pursuers. However, in practice it was not as straightforward. Generating a gravity force required was simple enough. 4 bump-shaped gravity well projectors handled that, but doing it in such a way as to not affect the vessel generating it or any craft in the immediate vicinity, and then projecting that force to a select point and maintaining it was a challenge. The Empire's first prototype interdictor was based on earlier, lesser successful Republic designs and built over Corellia. The ship was still untested when called to the Obrowski system to attempt to recapture a stolen vessel belonging to Grand Moff Tarkin. Unfortunately, the immobilizer systems overloaded, causing considerable casualties that included a number of civilians. Ultimately, with interdictor ships proving an easy target for rebels, the decision was made to cancel production and place gravity well projectors inside Star Destroyers instead. Turning the tables. Interdictor immobilized. An experimental interdictor commanded by Admiral Titus was stationed in the Xenis system. designed as a test zone for the Empire. Its gravity well projectors initially proved their worth when Titus captured and pulled in a small rebel patrol. Even better, the next rebel craft captured turned out to be the command vessel for the Phoenix Rebel Cell, its leader, Jun Sato, on board. However, that looked to end as a successful maiden voyage for the interdictor, and Titus soon turned to disaster when, during a rebel rescue mission, a young Jedi Padawan and his dusty old astromech managed to infiltrate the gravity well generator room. A quick piece of calculated sabotage refocused the ship's gravity well projectors back in on themselves, meant that when the rebels escaped and the interdictor systems fired up, the Imperial ship itself became the center point of the gravity projection. Instantly, its two escort ships were pulled in, resulting in the destruction of all three ships. Well, craft it says, but you get the point. Old friend, are behind the scenes here. The Imperial Interdictor Cruiser has been a regular in the Star Wars galaxy from an early stage, though it was never properly seen in action until 2016 Rebel episode Stealth Strike. Long before that, the model had been recorded in Westing Games' Imperial Sourcebook, which accompanied its popular Star Wars role-playing game released after Return of the Jedi. The look of the ship resembled a Star Destroyer with four spheres jammed into its hull, was established then and has survived largely intact. So there you go. Let's visit Ryloth. And if you've watched Rebels and if you've watched Clone Wars, you'd be familiar with Ryloth. If you haven't, it's where all the Twi'leks come from. Twi'lek, you would know the Twi'leks from Bib Fortuna in Empire Strikes Back. He was Jabba's number one dude. And if you watched Book of Boba Fett, he was the guy that Boba Fett went and killed when he took over Jabba's stuff. So those are the Twi'leks, and let's talk about Ryloth. Ryloth is situated near the end of the Corellian Run, far beyond Tatooine and Geonosis, towards the boundaries of wild space. The second in the three-world Ryloth system, and orbited by 5 moons whose gravitational pull affect the planet dramatically. It lies in the Gallus sector. Ryloth's geology is nothing if not diverse, and the planet possesses a multitude of deserts, mountain ranges, snow plains, and lush temperate forests, all of which are occupied by indigenous Rylothian wildlife. Many of these are lethally dangerous, forcing the native humanoid species of Twi'leks to live in enclosed cave systems or, at very least, in easily defended locations. Even the capital city of Lesu is ringed by a deep moat to guard against attack from the dangerous native creatures. So I always say Twi'leks, but some people might say Twi'leks, but I always say Twi'leks. I don't know why. Curious how everybody else pronounces it. uh, Slaves and spice. One of the first worlds to be discovered in the Outer Rim territories, Ryloth for a long time represented the farthest reaches of the Republic. However, its introduction to the wider galaxy wasn't as happy for the native Twi'leks as might have hoped. For while slavery had been common on Ryloth long before its first contact with the Republic, the opening up of trade with a willing and morally questionable galaxy saw a boom in the Twi'lek slave trade. Masters began selling their slaves to underworld organizations far and wide. Twi'lek women were especially vulnerable to capture as they became popular as dancing girls in bars and cantinas in less scrupulous locales. Despite numerous anti-slavery measures, uh, the trade flourished, and before long, Ryloth had become synonymous with illegal slave trade. Also, there was a dancing Twi'lek in Jabba's palace. She was the one that they threw the trap door, and she fell down, and they first. She was the first one that got eaten by the Rancor. So Not all Twi'leks found in the wider galaxy were slaves, however. Countless free Twi'leks poured into the vast melting pot of the galactic society and entered a multitude of occupations, including bureaucracy, politics, the underworld, and even the Jedi Order. Another byproduct of Ryloth's increased galactic exposure was the presence of mining, and with it the discovery of Rill, a mild spice primarily used in medication. Rill could also be a narcotic. Ryloth became a significant spice exporter, with even the Imperial Governor Moff Morse signing deals with the Hutts to export it. Ryloth had been a member of the Republic for many millennia before it fell and was represented in the Senate. It was at heart a pro-Republic world, and those loyalist tendencies led to Ryloth's strong support for Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, a decision which would come back to haunt it. During the Clone Wars and the Outer Rim sieges, Ryloth was duly targeted by the Confederacy of Independent Systems. After a short but brutal battle, the planet was taken by battle droids under the command of Techno-Union foreman Wat Tambor. Though Tambor was defeated and captured by troops led by Jedi Master Mace Windu, much of Lesu's wealth had been seized. Let's talk about the extreme weather, and we'll finish up this here. Due to the angle of the planetary rotation, Ryloth has vastly different daylight hours across the planet. From long days with with only a couple of hours of darkness to days that only see a shallow sunrise at the top of the sun as the top of the sun skims the horizon. Ryloth tilts its as it orbits the sun, creating the planet's unique atmospheric conditions. Boiling heat storms reach temperatures of 570 degrees Fahrenheit, while fierce winds reach speeds of 300 miles per hour, roasting and blasting the surface of the planet. Along with the terminator, the dividing line between the light and the dark part of the planet body, many choose to live underground in caves to avoid these storms. So, here we go. The battle against the Separatists had been won by combined forces, the Republic and Twi'lek Free Ryloth movement. The latter were led by Cham Syndulla, a reluctant but charismatic hero to his people, who was viewed with suspicion by a Twi'lek government that recognized the political threat he represented. While those politicians led by Senator Orn Free Taa collaborated, however, reluctantly with the Empire, Cham continued to lead the Twi'lek freedom fighters. Syndulla was focused on liberating Ryloth, even going so far as to unsuccessfully take on the Emperor and Darth Vader when opportunity presented itself. That part there, that's from it was a book that was written not long ago, probably in 2015, 2016. Um, Very good book, and it was something like Sith Masters or something, and it had a lot to do with Vader and the Emperor. So pretty good book, and it did cover Ryloth, and that's where it was pretty much focused around. His daughter Hera being from the Rebel show, saw the bigger picture and joined the gathering rebellion in the greater galaxy. It took more than 15 years for Cham to finally understand and then accept that the struggle against the imperial occupation of Ryloth could not be fought in isolation. Like it or not, Ryloth was part of a greater galaxy in the greater war against the Empire. After the Empire's defeat at Endor and Jakku, Ryloth does indeed find itself free of occupying armies. However, its economy and resources remain in perilous state and its infrastructure is sadly underdeveloped after so many years of oppression. Ryloth wildlife. Given the planet's geographical extremes, the wildlife of Ryloth is equally diverse, with many predatory species. The hard-shelled lilac leave their underground nests and roam the equatorial forests in ravening hordes, while the spiny gut cur are also rightfully feared by the Twi'leks. Even the blurg, if you watched Mandalorian, he rode a blurg. Even the blurg, used as beast of burden, is still a predator and to be feared if met in the wild. Few visitors who ignore the warnings of the native Twi'lek survive their arrogance. The tough carapace of the Gutkur or the lilac is immune to all but precise blaster bolt, and they never hunt alone. Prime cut, and this is our behind the scenes here. While the first Twi'leks fans were back in 1983 with the appearance of Bib Fortuna and Ula in Return of the Jedi, Ula being the dancer. The planet of Ryloth itself, originally known as Twi'lek or Twi'lek Prime, was first seen in the mid-90s X-Wing series of PC games. Role-playing company West End Games expanded greatly on the Star Wars galaxy with their D6 RPG series, and it was from there that the Twi'lek name originated. Ryloth's background and history uh, then began in earnest in the 1987 release Star Wars Sourcebook. Famously, it was this series of West End Games released that was given to author Timothy Zahn as background material when preparing his landmark Thrawn trilogy of books in the early 1990s. So that's all about Ryloth. Let's do some mining in the galaxy, part 2. Almost all asteroid fields contain resources of some description, but mining them represents a considerable challenge. The decision to set up operations in an asteroid field is based on a trade-off between the stability of the field and how valuable the resources within it are, and how safe or dangerous it is to extract those resources. Asteroid mining. Due to its inherent dangers, asteroid mining is usually, but not always, conducted by automation, with small craft delivering droids or workers to a site. Where possible, if organics are involved, excavation sites are sealed over and pressurized. Scanning tech prevents miners from digging out into the vacuum of space, but countless other dangers remain. For freighter owners, there are credits to be made hauling miners, droid or organic, to and from the mining sites, but more than shipping the ore itself, it's not a way of anyone for anyone to make a lot of credits, but it is mostly honest work. A simple way for asteroids to be mined for the resources relies on being able to operate at a considerable scale. Sadly, for any ship's captains looking for work, it tends to cut out the middleman. This method was demonstrated during the construction of the first Death Star over the planet Geonosis. The Geonosians had always mined the stable asteroid belt surrounding their planet, requiring the wide variety uh, of metal ores for their droids, vehicles, and starship factories. The creation of the Death Star, however, was a giant leap beyond even this. To facilitate the sheer size of the operation, a number of construction modules were built in orbit. It was to these that smaller asteroids were brought to be processed for their resources by orbiting factories. Just one of the many processes these enormous stations were capable of. I don't know why, but sometimes there's sentences as you start reading it, it just doesn't seem like it's written correctly. So I kind of struggle with those sometimes. Clausen 36 mining. Clausen 36 is a naturally occurring green-blue gas that, in its refined state, is a highly energy-efficient fuel that can be used in most starships and which is found across the galaxy. During the Age of the Empire, the influential mining guild operated a small Clausen extraction refinery on a planetoid in an asteroid belt in a remote part of the Outer Rim. The unique geology of the planetoid meant the gas naturally reproduced itself to make it a continually renewing energy, and as such, the plant was kept secret by the Empire. The gas pooled in a deep crater on a large asteroid, a rock big enough to hold an atmosphere. The mining guild built the refinery on the side of the crater, with an extraction platform pushing out into the gas. During the Civil War, the crew of the refinery were mostly Rhodian and were led by the famously grumpy Ushin. All of them could breathe Clausen 36 with no ill effects, saving the guild from having to provide breathing gear. Although the refinery was destroyed by rebel insurgents during the Civil War, the guild soon had it rebuilt and back in operation. Any ships approaching the refinery had to be cleared to do so or would face the wrath of the four guild starfighters, TIE fighters, and visiting ships were watched over by a number of manned anti-ship cannon. The Mining Guild. This is actually pretty interesting. There are groups older and, in their own field of business, more powerful even than a galactic government. The Mining Guild is one such organization. Before and during the Separatist crisis, many corporate bodies came together to form the collective organizations to represent interests in the political stage. The Trade Federation, the Techno Union, and so on. Predating these, and going on to survive the Clone Wars to outlive them too, was the Mining Guild. This was a powerful organization, a network of miners operating throughout virtually every mining operation in every corner of the galaxy and in every possible government. The assumption might have been that the mining guild fought for the rights of its workers, and, to a slight degree, this was the case. However, considering the appallingly dangerous conditions many miners toiled under, it was pretty obvious that their primary concern was simply to keep mines open regardless and to keep profits flowing. Accordingly, the guild worked closely with virtually every corporation that ran mining and/or refinery operations to ensure things were done right. Discussing with Han Solo the status of the operation on Bespin, Lando Calrissian expressed some relief that the Debana mining, processing, and shipping process he oversaw were a small enough operation that the mining guild of the Imperial era was not interested in it. This allowed his customers, smugglers, crime lords, and so on, the privacy they required to operate. The mining guild worked with the Empire to ensure quotas were met and the resources the Empire was so desperately required flowed unchecked. If there were casualties along the way, well, mining was always a dangerous business. So that's everything in this issue. So in this issue, we attached the LEDs and we tested and verified that they all worked, and that was pretty exciting. So that was issue 87. Next time, issue 88. Again, we're going to get the second part of this. So we'll get the second half, the matching half to this, and we'll have to do some work to get those all put together. And another LED strip, which I've got this one here. What I may end up doing is looking to see if I can find one continuous one. I'll have to figure out the length, and I might be able to order a continuous one. I just got to make sure that I get something that matches the voltage needed and all that kind of stuff. So, but I might do that because having these here, I don't want there to be any kind of a seam in between, and so that'll be kind of important to make sure that I get that taken care of. So look for that kind of stuff in issue 88. I want to thank everybody for watching, and may the force be with you always.